Every night at 2 a.m., I heard my mother's lullaby coming from downstairs. But the problem was, my mother had just passed away last month. My name is June, 27 years old, a freelance graphic designer. After my mother died from a sudden stroke, I decided to return to the old house in Vermont, where I was born and raised. I hoped to find the familiar peace there to help soothe the pain of losing my mother. I began to relive old habits, sitting in the exact chair my mother used to sit in, eating from the porcelain bowl she used. This made me feel as if my mother was still by my side like before. On the first night, I couldn't sleep because the emptiness in my chest kept stabbing sharply. I told myself I needed time to get used to life without my mother anymore. Then, when the clock struck exactly 2 a.m., a melody suddenly sounded from downstairs. At first, I thought it was a hallucination because there was no one else in the house but me. But when I listened more carefully, I was shocked to realize it was the lullaby my mother used to sing to me every night.
Sleep well, my dear. I am always here.
I ran downstairs to check but found nothing, and the singing had stopped at some point. Maybe I missed my mother so much that I created that sound in my head. In the following nights, the lullaby still played at exactly 2 a.m. But the melody was no longer gentle. The sounds began to distort and go off beat. I searched every drawer and corner of the room, trying to find where the sound came from. When I knelt beside the bed, I discovered an old cassette player, rusted and worn. I picked it up, my hands trembling as I pressed play.
Don't go to the basement. Don't go to the basement.
I couldn't endure it any longer. An unnamed urge forced me to go down. I jumped up, grabbed a flashlight and stepped out of the room. Downstairs, I stood frozen in front of the basement door that had somehow been left ajar. I had never gone in there. My mother had strictly forbidden me since I was a child, afraid I might fall. I reached out and pushed the door. The hinge screeched a long, chilling sound. When the flashlight stopped on a familiar object, my old cradle. Inside the cradle was an old leather notebook, its cover worn and torn. It was my mother's diary. I picked it up and flipped through the pages. The writing was broken, as if from someone losing their mind. On the last page, I saw a scribbled line, ink blurred as if smeared by tears. I took her life. However, why is she still present? I immediately put my hand on my chest. No warmth, no heartbeat. It turned out I was dead, but my soul was still trapped in this house. Every night I lived again, repeating familiar actions. And tonight, here I was again.
I never forgot that summer, the most terrifying time of my life. After my parents got divorced, I moved in with Aunt Clara, a distant relative of my family. Her house was eerily quiet, with curtains always drawn shut, whether it was day or night. That night, while I was sleeping, I heard a piano melody echoing through the silence. The haunting, sorrowful notes sounded like a choked sob in the night. When I went out to check, the sound abruptly stopped. The next morning, I asked Aunt Clara about it, but she said I had only been dreaming. But through Aunt Clara's evasive gaze, I knew she was lying. I felt that someone was inside, and I wanted to know who it was. That night, I didn't sleep, my eyes fixed on the door of my room. At exactly midnight, the piano music started again, louder than ever. I left my room and slowly approached the door across the hallway. As I drew near, the door creaked open. Bit by bit, I felt as if an invisible force was guiding my legs, pulling me into the room. It was a dark bedroom, dimly lit by the pale moonlight spilling through the window. Beside the bed stood an old, dusty piano. The most terrifying part was that the keys were moving on their own, though no one was sitting there. Suddenly, I saw a girl in a worn white dress standing near the window. Her long hair covered her face, revealing only a twisted, pale smile.
Come play with me.
In an instant, my whole body was yanked toward the piano. As my fingers touched the keys, fragmented memories flooded my mind. A girl in a white dress, sitting at the piano on a grand stage. She played with all her passion, her hands gliding gently over the keys. Suddenly, the ceiling light crashed down right where she sat. I screamed in fear, but no sound came out of my throat.
Jack, why did you come in here?
That was when I snapped back to reality. Aunt Clara stood beside me, her face pale with fear. Afterward, I tried to calm down and told her everything. Upon hearing it, Aunt Clara broke into sobs. It turned out that the room across from mine had belonged to Emily, her daughter. Emily had loved playing the piano, but an accident that year left her unable to play ever again. Unable to accept the truth, Emily took her own life in that very room. Since that night, Aunt Clara locked the room tightly and never let me enter it again. But every night, the sound of the piano still echoed, achingly beautiful and filled with sorrow.
I am Anna, 19 years old this year. I just passed the university entrance exam and moved to the city to study. The first time stepping into the big city, everything was unfamiliar to me. I thought I would have interesting experiences here, but the first memory of this place was something I could never have expected. I rented a room deep in a small alley, about a 10-minute walk from the university. The dormitory is old, with peeling walls, a narrow and dark hallway. The landlady is a woman in her 50s, and she led me to a room on the second floor. At the end of the hallway, the small room appears before me with a simple wooden bed against the wall, an old study table, and a small window overlooking the hallway.
This room is a bit old, but very clean and quiet. What do you think?
I think it's quite nice. May I ask, is anyone staying in the room across the hall?
That room is empty. No one has stayed there yet. You clean the room, and if you need anything, just call me, okay?
I quickly tidied up the room, and once I was done, it was already dark outside. The dormitory was very quiet at night, and I could hardly hear the bustling traffic on the street. I lay on the bed, exhausted, and quickly drifted off to sleep. I vaguely heard footsteps in the hallway. Perhaps someone had just returned to their room, so I didn't pay much attention and continued to sleep. The next day, I was preparing the content for the presentation, and I was so focused on writing that I lost track of time. Pick up the phone to check. It's already 0000 p.m. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps clattering in the hallway. I wondered who could still be walking around outside at this hour. I looked out the window, but the corridor was quiet and empty. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly shut the window and rushed to bed. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by the sound of children playing, and there were whispers of people talking, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. Those sounds seemed to be right outside my room. Is anyone there? I called out, but all I received was an invisible silence, a chilling atmosphere enveloping the entire room. I fearfully turned to look out the window. Suddenly, I saw a shadow standing outside the window, a hazy silhouette. Only part of the face could be seen staring at her. The next morning, I decided to tell the landlady about my experiences over the past few days.
It could just be the sound of a cat. There are a lot of homeless cats in this region at night.
Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?
You must be so exhausted that you're only having nightmares.
I wanted to leave this place, but finding affordable accommodation in the city was difficult. If I were to move out now, I wouldn't know where to go. If those sounds stopped completely, I thought I might be able to stay a little longer. A few days later, I no longer heard those strange sounds. Perhaps the landlady did something to keep them from bothering me. If those sounds completely disappear, I think I could stay here a bit longer. At midnight, I suddenly heard a knock on the door. I got up, stepped outside, and opened it, but no one was there. As I looked around, I noticed a man standing motionless not far away, his back turned to me. A chill ran down my spine as I slowly walked towards the man and called out, "Is anyone there?"
Get out of here. You are not allowed to stay here.
Why am I not allowed to be here? Who are you? The man slowly turned around, the light from the bulb revealing a gruesome, bloodied face, an image I could never forget. Seeing that image, I screamed in fear. But looking around, it was the familiar room again. It turns out everything was just a dream. Suddenly, a knocking sound echoed. I didn't know who was knocking on my door in the middle of the night like that. I began to fear and secretly thought, could it be them? The people in the room opposite? Who is it? Who's out there? The knocking continued to grow louder, as if the person outside was about to break the door down. I was terrified, staring at the door without daring to breathe heavily.
Get out of here. Get out of here.
I knew that if I stayed, even more terrifying things awaited me.
When I woke up, it was already bright outside, and the door was still tightly shut as if nothing had happened. I quickly took everything I had and left this horrible house.
I had a feeling that if I stayed any longer, even more terrifying things would await me.
The man and that room remain a mystery to me. But after everything that has happened, I no longer dare to return to that boarding house again.
I was an online seller and had just moved into a new house to support my business. Luckily, I found a rather spacious house in a small neighborhood, and the rent was incredibly reasonable. During the first few nights living there, I was often awakened by the sound of scissors echoing from the next room. I thought to myself, could it be a thief? Summoning all my courage, I went out to check. But as soon as I opened the door, the sound disappeared, and the door to the other room remained tightly shut. Everything seemed normal, as if nothing had happened, so I tiredly returned to my bedroom. A while later, I was woken up again by the same sound, but this time it was louder and more urgent. A growing sense of unease crept over me, and my heart pounded in my chest. I got out of bed and went to the next room, but just like before, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. As I was about to close the door, I suddenly noticed a woman standing in the middle of the room. Her head bowed. She was holding a pair of rusty scissors, the blades dripping with a thick, dark liquid onto the floor. I stood frozen in the doorway, my legs glued to the ground, unable to move. Who are you? Why are you in my house? The woman didn't answer. Instead, she slowly lifted her face and it was no longer intact. Her mouth had been slit open all the way to her ears and deep scratches covered her face, oozing fresh blood. Terrified, I let out a scream, only to realize I was lying in bed with sunlight streaming in through the window. Was it just a dream? But the fear felt so real and cold sweat drenched my body. Unable to shake off my unease, I decided to call the landlord to ask about the woman. However, he dismissed my concerns, saying he knew nothing, before hurriedly hanging up. I had a gut feeling that he was hiding something about the history of the house. That night, the events repeated themselves, but this time, the sound seemed to be right next to my ear. Frightened, I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the chilling noise. Moments later, the sound suddenly stopped, and I thought that perhaps it was finally over. But when I opened my eyes, I was horrified to see the woman floating above me on the ceiling, laughing eerily. Her face drew closer and closer, her icy breath sending shivers down my spine. Overcome with terror, I screamed, mustering all my strength to leap out of bed and dash out of the house. Her sinister laughter echoed behind me, following every step I took. That night, I booked a nearby hotel to stay in, desperate to get away from that cursed house. The next morning, as I returned, I ran into a neighbor who had just come back from somewhere. Hello, ma'am. I just moved into the house across the street.
You live in that house?
Yes, but I'm planning to move out today. Is there something wrong?
A long time ago, a woman was brutally murdered by her husband in that house.
Why did her husband do that?
She was having an affair, and when her husband found out, he slit her face and then killed her before turning himself into the police.
I saw her last night. Her face was horrifying.
Ever since she died, she's been haunting that house, scaring off women with beautiful faces like yours.
A chill ran down my spine, sending a wave of goosebumps over my skin.